Another day, another batch of Zion Williamson trade rumors, but I'll tell you why there's more credence to the ones that just came out. Plus, are the Pelicans actually tanking or not? It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider Credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday, and we got a fresh batch of Zion Williamson trade rumors here. I want to get into the tanking, or are the Pelicans actually trying to do that, or are they just bad? Little column A, little column B, maybe. And then let's look at the bigs. Mo Bamba's impact, Karlo Matkovic too, as well as a couple of others here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into it. Fresh and actually far more interesting trade rumors around Zion Williamson than I think we've gotten anywhere else. So let's get into this one. And it's all going to come from ESPN, Brian Windhorst, and the Hoops Collective. And on one of the latest episodes of the Hoops Collective podcast, Brian Windhorst, Tim McMahon, and Tim Bontemps kind of discussed Zion Williamson and his value here. And it goes, quote, and I listened to this the other day, quote, and this was McMahon saying, quote, I remember Bobby Marks, and I wrote a story just as he was about to come back and kind of what's coming with Zion Williamson? What the trade value and market might be for him. Somebody told us then the goal is to ramp him up and restore his value, whether that's for the Pelicans or another team. And he's handling the first part. To his credit, he is absolutely handling the first part. And then Brian Windhorst jumped in and said, I still don't know how much they can actually get for him based on his injury history, to which Tim McMahon replied, there's some teams that would have significant interest. And the way that Tim McMahon said that significant interest part, there's some teams that would have significant interest, he is heavily implying, if you watch this and listen to the way that he says it, that he knows something here. And you know what? He very well might know something here. There are some teams that would have significant interest. So I want to go over to an article on ESPN's Insiders. You got to pay for it, but I'm going to read part of it here. And it's kind of talking about, how some of these lottery teams kind of just jumpstart their rebuild here. And it's got a quote from an anonymous general manager that Windhorst put into this. And it's, quote, the question about the Pelicans is whether they would consider trading Zion, a rival general manager said. Quote, it hasn't really been an option over the last couple of years because he's been injured and his value hasn't been high enough. Even now, I don't think they could get great value, so they will probably see if he can carry this play over into next year. To me, that kind of quashes some of these trade rumors, but these guys are all very credible. Brian Windhorst in particular is someone I trust when he puts reporting out there. Tim Bontemps, Tim McMahon, a little bit less so than him, but they're all very credible people. So McMahon saying there's some teams that would have significant interest seems to kind of contradict that a little bit, right? So here's how you read this. And here's how I read this. Teams can be very interested in Zion Williamson. There's no reason why teams shouldn't be interested in trying to get Zion Williamson. He's playing by far, the best basketball of his career right now. So teams can be very interested in Zion, but they might not be willing to pay the right price for the New Orleans Pelicans. I'm a sneaker guy. And the analogy here I'm going to use is, and I use StockX, regardless of what you think about it here. One of the features I love about that is there's a pair I want, and I'm like, I'm not going to pay above X amount of dollars for those shoes. You can just put in a thing of like, this is the price I'm going to pay for them. And then someone can take it or not. And sometimes that sits there for a little bit. I think it lasts for a month. And every now and then I do that on a pair I would like, but I'm just not going to pay what everyone's asking for it right now. Maybe a couple weeks later, you get an alert being like, pairs being shipped to you. I've been surprised once or twice by that when I completely forgot that out of there, which is nice surprise, but also can be expensive. So that's what this is, right? Teams can be very interested. I'm very interested in a lot of stuff I want to buy, but I'm not going to pay the price that it is. That's probably what we're seeing here. And when we talked about Zion Williamson last week in the trade, you potentially trading him because his value might be at the highest point, it might be, but his value has been real low in the past. Really low. You're not going to get a top 5 draft pick in this upcoming draft for Zion Williamson. Would I do that? Probably, especially if the Pelicans have, 2 top 5 picks here. I'd be very interested in that idea. But you're not going to get that for Zion Williamson. And if you do, that'd be really cool. But I don't think that that's going to happen in any shape or form, given the track record. We talked about this when trading Zion Williamson would just maybe alleviate stress for everybody here, right? You just move on from him and we get off of this roller coaster because, frankly, it can be exhausting. Other teams are aware of this. Other teams are entirely aware of that. Now, all it takes is one to convince themselves of this stuff. But in general, I still, at this point in time, struggle to see exactly what the offers would be. I don't doubt that a lot of teams are interested in Zion Williamson. Look, every team would trade a second-round pick for him. That could be very interested. But they're probably not at the price that New Orleans would require, just given the risk, given the injury. And yes, he's playing exceptional basketball right now, but it's in under 30 minutes per game since he's come back from that injury. And at that point, you still need to kind of factor in, can he play 34 minutes per game, right? That's kind of what you would be looking at with him. That's kind of, a minute higher than his career highs of 33.2, 33. So if he, isn't going to play 34 minutes or just isn't capable of it, or this is like the best way to use him, and maybe it is, right? You need to factor that in because teams are going to look at that and go, oh, well, we're not going to give you as much unless he can play over 30 minutes. But if he can't, there's no point in it, right? Look, he's averaging 25, 7, and 5 assists over the past 22 games. He missed this game against the San Antonio Spurs that we'll talk a bit about in the next segment here, the next 2 segments. Next segment about the 2 latest games they played, last 2 losses. So you look at it and it's like, that's going to scare some teams off. And that's worth keeping in mind here, that if a rival GM is like, yeah, they're not going to get anything. Clearly that GM is like, I'm not going to give much up for him right now. All it takes is one team. But if that's the case, it likely is going to be they end up keeping him. That could change in the future, very much so, though. And look, it really just depends on the offers. And it might also depend on where the Pelicans fall in the draft lottery. That's going to be a really important day for the New Orleans Pelicans. So coming up next, after that game against the San Antonio Spurs, up 8 to down 10 to leading to a loss, what's this team doing? They beat the Clippers the other day. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they tanking? Break it all down. That's coming up here next. I'm going to answer that question in a way you don't realize. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. And it's really simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So here's a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. Late night cravings. Whether you're staying up watching highlights or just need a midnight snack, use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. You need lunch on the go, need a quick and easy lunch the next day. With Dash Pass, you can get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have a Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here. The bracket is out, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can bet $200. Can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's cutting down the nets. Or if you want to get on the Pelicans action, they're 6-point underdogs. They're +6 against the Detroit Pistons. Pistons have been looking good, but Cade Cunningham's hitting a slump. That's a tricky line. I'm curious what you think. +6, -6. Let me know in the comments down below. The FanDuel app is super easy to use, and when you win, you're going to get paid instantly. No waiting around. So with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action. There we go. All tournament long. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget about the daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can subscribe over at LockedOnDaily.com. LockedOnDaily.com. Just scroll down to you see the Locked On Pelicans logo. Some really great writing and other things in there. Not just from me, but from others we have around the league. Just experts like you've never seen. Give it a shot. Give it a read. You're going to like it. I promise. All right, let's keep talking about the New Orleans Pelicans. That's what we do. That was an awful transition on my part. So, it's like really not my best. So, let's look at the past 2 games for the New Orleans Pelicans, losing to the San Antonio Spurs in kind of close-ish fashion, but also really losing in big fashion to the Orlando Magic. Both games, not great, depending on what you want this team to be doing here. And so losing could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, depending on how you feel about it. If you're looking for tanking, if you're basically looking to the draft, the lottery, this is good. And these 2 losses have put the Pelicans kind of close by. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games. They're only a game up on Charlotte for the 3rd worst record. Charlotte's 17-49. The Pelicans are 18-50 right now. So things are looking decent for New Orleans to maybe even get into the top 3, which a moment ago didn't really seem like something that they were going to be able to do. You look at teams like Toronto, who's won 3 in a row, kind of putting some distance there. Philly's got 23 wins. Brooklyn has 22. So there's a 4-game gap between New Orleans at the 4 spot and the 5 spot, and that's at least pretty good. Both those teams are really going to start to be bad. Brooklyn is 1-9 in their last 10. But what's New Orleans doing? 2 games ago, they had a win against the Los Angeles Clippers, and that was a little bit surprising. But then these other 2 games happen, and are they trying to tank or are they not? And when I watched both of these games, I do think there's a few things here that just really jump out at you with this Pelicans team. And I really want to look at the San Antonio Spurs game because I made a joke on Twitter of this was a team that was up. The Pelicans kind of took control of this game midway through the 3rd quarter. It felt like they were really starting to get some momentum going into half and then really kind of busted it open in the 3rd quarter, being up 8 as much. And then everything went downhill from there. Despite being up 8 in the 3rd quarter, New Orleans lost that quarter 25-34. If you were looking for them to tank, they did a masterful job in that 3rd quarter. Just absolutely atrocious basketball. Really the second half of that from the New Orleans Pelicans. They were 1 of 8 from 3 here. Meanwhile, they were leaving wide open 3-point shooters for the San Antonio Spurs, who went 6 of 7. And that was going to be kind of all she wrote. That's where the game really swung. Keldon Johnson, 3 of 3. Jeremy Sohan, 1 of 1, right? Devin Vassell, 2 of 2. The only miss they had was Harrison Barnes going 0 for 1. 6 of 7 from 3. 34-25 as New Orleans started to, just do everything completely wrong. They weren't really able to rebound. One day I will stop coughing, and I apologize for all of this here. They lost the second chance points battle in this one, and that was kind of big, despite doing a number of other things right. They killed the team in points in the paint. They beat them on fast break, but they lost that second chance points battle, and that has been a big issue for New Orleans, all season long, and you just can't do that sort of thing. So when I watched this game, you saw CJ McCollum going off 26 points, 10 of 25. He was 5 of 12 from 3, which is really great. Trey Murphy, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, looking really good. 4 of 11, which I'll take from him here from deep in this game. But everyone else just really struggled. Jordan Hawkins not playing well in this one, at all in the 18 minutes that he had. Bruce Brown had 19 points, but you saw him kind of at least running the offense, but missing some obvious things. It was a mixed bag when it came to him. When you look at the game against the Orlando Magic, this was a team that just got wrecked by the 2 best players, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero. And this gets to the ultimate point that I want to make here. Is this one, are the Pelicans trying to tank, or are they just bad? So we mentioned CJ, we mentioned Trey, and some of the other players, right? None of those guys are trying to tank. Not one single one of those guys are trying to tank. While they want to be competitive and they want to win, and maybe the best route to do that for the New Orleans Pelicans is through the draft, if you bring in somebody, say it's a point guard, say you get the second overall pick and you're drafting Dylan Harper, that guy's coming for CJ McCollum's job. You think CJ wants that? Once he's in the league, he'll obviously help him out. Once he's a teammate, he'll obviously do that. But these dudes don't care. They want to go out, they want to play well, they want to earn more money, and they want to win because they're professional athletes, and you're kind of wired a little bit differently for the most part here. These players don't care about tanking. CJ wouldn't go for 26 points if that's the case, right? But maybe it's just that the team's bad, and that's why they're in this position in the first place. They have some talent here, but they're 9-19 when Zion Williamson plays. When you just look at this team overall, they're just not good. They went into the season flawed, and a big part of this has to do with rebounding, something that they've been experimenting with to try and figure out what the heck to do here. But this team is still dead last in terms of defensive rebounding rate. And going into the season without really addressing the center spot, despite what we've seen from Yves Missi, who has been good, but he was the 17th overall pick, or 21, whatever it was. You don't expect him to make that sort of massive impact, right? The Pelicans are 0.5% worse in defensive rebounding percentage than any other team. Like, it's that bad. That's not how you're going to win very many games, right? And that's never been addressed. We'll get to Mo Bamba and some of the other bigs in the next segment here. But when you look at this team in areas that they struggle with, they don't take enough 3-point attempts. It's just that simple. Even with Zion not playing, you should take more, and they just don't do it, right? They're not a great overall shooting team because they don't have guys that are taking those kind of shots. They have 5 players that are shooting above 36% from 3. Jose, CJ, Brandon Ingram's not there anymore, so they have 4. Antonio Reeves is getting very limited minutes, and then Trey Murphy, and that's really kind of it. When you look at them defensively, no matter who's out there on the court, they've been struggling. Of their 4 most used lineups, the ones that qualify for leaderboard rankings on cleaningtheglass.com, only one of them is a positive, and that's DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Yves Missi. We only got to see it for 108 possessions, so it's really, really limited here. It's positive 13 is a 13.7 plus 13.7 net rating. Really good here. But the defense is in the bottom third. The rebounding would be dead last defensive rebounding in the league. So while that lineup's good, the defense has just been bad. The defense has just been atrocious all season long. Not having Murray for very many games, having Herb Jones be out for the season, those are big contributors to that too. But even when they were healthy, there were concerns about that defense from game 1. In the first 4 games of the season, you could see there were big problems here. And when you look at these lineups, their 4 most used lineups, it's not working out. Look, you even have the CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, Kelly Olynyk, Yves Missi lineup. It's a negative 12.5 net rating. That's 3 bigs out there. We thought that might help with the rebounding. It's 30. It would be one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the league. It wouldn't be as bad as they are now, but they would still be 20th when it came to that with that rate. It's just a poorly constructed team because the center spot, the big man rotation, has not truthfully been figured out no matter what. So let's look at some of the bigs. And if they can figure out, if this team can really figure out what to do in that area and how are some of them playing, who should be back, who shouldn't be. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So the too long didn't listen part of this is they're not tanking. They're not trying to tank. They don't want to do, the players and the coaches don't want to do that. They want to win basketball games. But the way the team has been constructed from obvious issues from the offseason when they just did not bring in an elite center or a guy that's, better than Misi. And again, Misi will develop fine, but he's a rookie. You don't expect him to make that impact. They were going to be in trouble from the beginning if you didn't have rim protection or rebounding. And look at it now. So no, they're not trying to tank, but sometimes you just have those quarters where you're bad because of the issues we just described. So coming up next, let's look at those big men. We'll talk about them coming up here next. I've been impressed with Karlo Matkovic. Let's talk about him. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, so you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you just stop. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. That's what makes this app different. So when you start using Monarch Money, you're going to realize how much you're spending on food delivery. And if it's too much, you can budget smarter and save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And if you have a partner, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever because you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use Locked On NBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code Locked On NBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about your Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. What's going on with the Saints being oddly aggressive in free agency? What does that mean for the team? Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, is going to make sense of everything black and gold, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One day, this lingering thing from whatever I had, when I apologize for all the cough, and I can't tell you how sick I was a couple of weeks ago, and I still can't shake some of this despite like multiple doctor trips and everything. They just basically said, gotta just let your body kind of handle it at this point in time. So I know I'm coughing. I'm sure it's awful to listen to. My setup doesn't have like a cough button, or should it really? But maybe we need to kind of like build in something like that because, whoa, this is unfun here. So let's look at the bigs here because Mo Bamba has now played 3 games for the New Orleans Pelicans. And how's he doing? Look, when you look at rebounding, them needing that, right? We'd said Mo Bamba can be a very good defensive rebounder, but it's going to take more than that here. And you got to look at it in the context of the team. And look, it's a 3-game sample here. So we're not going to read too much into this, but we're going to at least look and see how it's trending. I'm kind of curious, and that's what we do. So, and we're going to look at all the bigs overall, but let's start with Mo Bamba, because when you look at him so far that he's played right now, he has the highest defensive rebounding rate on the team by a mile. Defensive rebounding percentage is an estimate of the percentage of available defensive rebounds a player grabs while they were out there on the court. So rebounds that you can get. What's the percentage that this dude gets them? Maybe a teammate gets that. So, that'll lower your number. Maybe it's the opponent grabs an offensive rebound. But basically, this can give you an idea. I prefer the stat over just rebounds per game and things like that, because if you're playing against a team that misses a ton of shots, you're going to have more chances for rebounds. This is of available defensive rebounds. What is your percentage? Going into basically before Mo Bamba was signed, Kelly Olynyk, of guys that have played significant minutes for New Orleans, was the highest at 22%. Mo Bamba has a defensive rebounding percentage here of 35.7. That is close to what Jonas Valanciunas' numbers were, and New Orleans had been a pretty good defensive rebounding team with him out there on the court. Big body that just grabbed defensive boards like nobody's business. Not a great rim protector or defender, but he did that really, really well. So Mo Bamba's, frankly, doing that, and that's what you want to see. Now, is that having an impact on the team? And this is where it gets interesting. And this is also small sample size theater is what we call it, where it's almost like a show that is kind of funny because these numbers can swing wildly, right? One game could make this significantly different for Mo Bamba here. So he's grabbing defensive boards. He's doing that particularly well. We're going to admit that here. His defensive rebounds per game right now is basically 6. In the minutes that he's doing, it's pretty good. If it was per 36 minutes, he'd be grabbing 11 and a half defensive rebounds per 36 minutes. Those numbers are good. But the team is rebounding defensively worse with him on the court than off the court. Now, I don't think there's much to be made of that yet, and it probably has to do with some of the lineups that he's playing with. And when you look at him, out there on the court, there's, when you're playing with just nobody else, I mean, what are you supposed to do, right, when it comes to that? So I think that is worth keeping in mind, that this might just be small sample size, but it's not having the type of impact that you would really like him to have. And that is mildly concerning. They're obviously worse with him on the court than off the court, and certainly that's not what you want to see. Someone who's playing about neutral, which I think is pretty good here, is Karlo Matkovic. He's at a net rating, the on-off numbers of just 0.1 positive. So basically neutral. Let's call it that. I'm fine with that because he's not a starter, at least not yet, but he's doing some things well. And the team, and it's a larger sample size here, is rebounding slightly better with him on the court than off the court. Now, it's not, obviously a big number or anything like that, but it's impacting it at least in a positive way that we haven't seen from other players. So with the way that he is playing, and when you look at some of the things he does, he just has a knack for being, in my opinion, in the right spot at the right time. And when you look at block percentage, and this is an estimate of the percentage of opponent 2-point field goal attempts blocked by the player while they were on the floor, he has the highest on the team. You would have think Mo Bamba being kind of that rim protector. Mo Bamba's is up there. Matkovic is at 5.6. Bamba's at 5.4. So Matkovic has shown you a bit of a propensity to protect the rim. You saw it in the game against San Antonio. He was also there under the basket, just kind of finishing things at a high level. Karlo also has the highest true shooting percentage on the team, which is also a really important number to look at. He's basically grading out to be a net zero, a net neutral, in my opinion, and that's not a bad thing to see. So overall, you're seeing him, of all the bigs other than Kelly Olynyk, kind of making the most impact right now. I view him as a backup big, a guy that can come off the bench, right? Along with Olynyk, that gives you something a little bit different. Frankly, Olynyk is probably the type of player that he should look to try and emulate and become. He'd need to be a little bit better of a defensive rebounder, but he's doing all of those other things really well, and I've been pretty impressed. This is a guy that looks like a rotation big at the NBA level. That hasn't always been the case with some of the players that we see and get excited about here, but you can really see it with Karlo Matkovic. And as he's been playing better, you're seeing the double-doubles come through, which is a weird stat and kind of slightly overrated in my opinion. But you're seeing him play just better. And I'm happy with that right now and kind of what you're getting from him. Over his last 5 games, he's averaging basically 12 points and 8 rebounds per, along with about an assist, half a steal, and 1 block per game. Shooting 50% from 3 on very limited attempts there, but looking pretty good overall. He's shooting 70% from the field. That's a guy that if you start to watch him more is going to help you win games more than lose games, and does seem to fit well next to Zion Williamson. And ultimately, if they're keeping Zion, given what we talked about in the first segment here, that's ultimately going to be one of the most important things with it. It's looking decent so far. And so I'm excited to see him play more, and he can be a bit of a bright spot for the New Orleans Pelicans, I think, in the future, as you look for this team to try and kind of rebuild and be competitive. But I think it's pretty clear you still need to address the center position, the big man position in the offseason. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back with you all tomorrow to recap the game. Happy St. Patrick's Day, by the way, here. Let me hit the outro video. Bye.